Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. Emily Hope and Squax, Elkston, the Kamloops Art Gallery. My name is Emily Hope. I'm the Education and Public Programs Director here at the Kamloops Art Gallery. Before we get started, I just wanted to talk for a minute about where we're all sitting. The concept of here is always a bit funny in these virtual gatherings, but for those of us joining from the regions surrounding the gallery, here is Tk'emlúps, the territory of the Tk'emlúps to Secwepemc. I've introduced myself in Secwepemc because that's the language of this land. What we refer to as Kamloops and beyond, spanning over 180,000 square kilometers across the interior plateau of what we call British Columbia, is Secwepemc, the territory of the Secwepemc people. It is an immense privilege to be a guest on these lands, and I'm so grateful to my teachers, Jessica Arnoose and Sunny Prairie Chicken, for making space for me in their classrooms, for their generosity, their guidance, and their patience. Yeet Skukstechem. I'm joined today by exhibiting artist Lucas Morneau, artist Hazel Meyer, and curator Tak Pham. Our program will be about an hour in duration and will include some time at the end for questions and conversation. You can submit your questions through the Q&A box that's, if you're on a desktop at the bottom of your screen. You can also chat with us and amongst yourselves through the webinar chat window there. Please note that you can choose to send the message to all panelists, which will just be available to the four of us here, or to everyone, which then you can have a conversation with the other attendees. I'll begin now by reading a couple of some very brief biographies to introduce you to everyone, and then I'll pass the floor to Tak. Hazel Meyer is an interdisciplinary artist who works with installation, performance, and text to investigate the relationships between sport, sexuality, feminism, and material culture. Meyer's work aims to recover the queer aesthetics, politics, and bodies often effaced within histories of sports and recreation. Drawing on archival research, Meyer designs immersive installations that bring various troublemakers, lesbian feminists, gender outlaws, leather-dykes, into the performative spaces of athletics. Hi, Hazel. Lucas Morneau is a queer interdisciplinary artist and curator of English, Newfoundlander, and French Quebecois European settler descent from Katakamukuk, Newfoundland, Labrador, Canada. They received their Bachelor of Fine Arts at Memorial University and their Master of Fine Arts at University of Saskatchewan. Working across mediums, but most known for their textile and photographic work, Morneau uses humor to deconstruct and critique hegemonic masculinity, the gender binary, and homophobia in Canadian and Newfoundland culture. Tak Pham is a Vietnamese contemporary art curator and art critic. He holds a Bachelor of Arts with honors in history and theory of architecture from Carleton University and a Master of Fine Arts in criticism and curatorial practices from OCAD University. He has written for Espèce Art Actuelle, SE Arts and Opinions, and Canadian Art, among others, and curated exhibitions, projects, and public programming at the Art Gallery of Ontario, X-Space Cultural Centre, Trinity Square Video, and Nuit Blanche Toronto, to name a few. Pham is currently Associate Curator at the Mackenzie Art Gallery in Regina. Hello, everyone. Hi, Lucas. Hi, Tak. Please join me in welcoming our speakers today, Tak, Hazel, and Lucas.
Thank you, Emily, for that amazing introductions. Hi, Hazel. Hi, Lucas. How are you?
Hi.
Hi.
Well, how are both of you?
Good, good. Yeah, so thank you very much for joining me today on this panel, and also I'd like to extend welcome to the audience who are watching it online. I hope you are also doing well. So just as the title for this panel, the discussion suggested, I think we will approach our conversation play by play. So there will be a kind of like an outline for the panel where we will kind of like visit each play exhibitions, and then as well as practices from each of your respective careers. And then there will be also a few thematic conversations that we can have towards the end. So with that, let me share my screen here. Okay. Sharing screen. So I have put together, a slideshow of sorry, it's not okay. It's not proceeding. Of a few images from the exhibition Queer Newfoundland Hockey League. And I thought that we will start with basically to reintroduce ourselves and also our audience to the show, especially for folk who live far away or still haven't had a chance to go and visit the show in person. Yeah, so Lucas, like, do you wanna talk a little bit about the show? Like, what is Queer Newfoundland Hockey League?
Yeah, so QNHL for short is a fictional hockey league that I've created, mostly because I wanted to work with sort of hockey paraphernalia as art object, but also at the time it was a project that I was working on when a lot of issues and what's the right word, like these little instances of negativity that were popping up within hockey that were really in the limelight within Canadian news. So, for example, the firing of Don Cherry and his comments, that was one of the things that sort of made me think about the issue that sort of happens in hockey, which is homophobia. And for a while, I've been wanting to work with hockey. I wanted to work with hockey cards, and I wanted to rug hook. And the series sort of came together right as the beginning of the pandemic happened. And for me, I ended up focusing on something that I could do at home, which was crochet and rug hooking. And I decided to take some of the pejoratives that one might hear on the ice, in locker rooms, and eventually elsewhere like schoolyards, and to use those as the team names for this hockey league, and using Newfoundland town names. At the time I was living in Newfoundland and I'm a Newfoundlander, but I wanted to use some town names that are sometimes, some of them are funny, like leather-dykes, or some towns that meant something to me. And I wanted to sort of use humor as a way to have this conversation about homophobia within sports, but particularly with Canada within hockey.
Amazing. Thank you for that very, very thorough introduction. So I think I watched from one of your interview that this exhibition started with these playing cards. And as you can see right here, these are some of the characters, wearing your jerseys, but also, bearing the names, that you have to mentioned earlier, like here at the bottom right corner, we have leather-dykes. So can you talk more about, like how this process, came about, and and your process of kind of like creating these characters, kind of like deciding their features, their characteristics, or like how like, for example, kind of like choosing names for them, because there's a lot of similarities I see here, with drag artists, when they come up with like look of persona, and and how that look and that persona reflect the name that they're choosing. Perhaps you could touch on some of those questions.
Yeah, so first and foremost, I am a drag performer. I did my master's in Saskatoon, and I performed in the Saskatoon drag scene for a few years. And during that time, I developed my MFA thesis, which was called The Queer Mummer, which uses a Newfoundland tradition that happens around Christmas time called mummering, which involves this gender inversion or drag, and wanting to call out homophobia that was happening within Newfoundland, and specifically also the discrimination that drag performers would face. And so I blended the aesthetics of drag with mummering for that. And through that, I've really really decided from there that I really wanted to work with personas as a part of my practice, especially as someone who is gender nonconforming. It really allows me to, you know, make up these personas and play them for, you know, a photo shoot or a video, and then, you know, wash it off and go about my day. And have this like great fun with my art practice. By no means isn't there any negative part of it. You know, the makeup always breaks out my skin, but you know, for this series, I made some business cards, and I don't know if I have them around me, but they look like hockey cards. And I was having a conversation. I was out for some lunch with Megan Mizzou and Ursula Johnson, and I was discussing how I kind of wanted to make them into hockey cards, like make a series of hockey cards. And I was like, but like that's such a one-off thing. Like I would have to like make a project about it or something. And then they were like, yeah, it kind of sounds like a cool like art object. So really, yeah, the series kind of started off with this idea of having multiple personas in these hockey cards, and again playing with gender and playing with masquerade with that. One of the things about the hockey cards is that some of the last names actually coincide with some like long-standing families that existed in those areas. So I think some names, like I don't think Fagin is one of the ones for Fogo. I forget now, but there is a lot of the names, like the last names, that coincide with people who are from that area. And so I kind of wanted for like an inside joke or inside like nod for Newfoundlanders to see the cards and sometimes recognize the last names for people from, or like of a possible family member, right? And for this too, it's not all me. Throughout the series, you know, doing a lot of handmade stuff is really hard on your body. So I have a knitting machine here now, but my body started to give out. So I ended up getting a studio assistant who helped me out. And I thought it'd be appropriate to have her be in some of the cards as well. And so Libby shows up in, I believe, 4 of the cards.
Interesting. And do you have plan to like, you know, bring any of these characters to life one day for a special performance?
I've really been thinking about doing like a possible video project. During the pandemic, I really got back into rollerblading and doing research into why rollerblading sort of died off, which actually one of the reasons was homophobia. People called them fruit boots. So I kind of wanted to do like a performance / happening where there'd be like a rollerblade hockey tournament with the teams, and then like have it like a 3-on-3 and have all queer people doing it, have like some Don Cherry character doing interviews and all that. But it's not something that I have fully realized to the extent that I'd want to, and the capacity that I can like do it. I definitely work most of the time by myself, so that's something I'd have to like hire a crew for. And having never done that, I think I do have some hesitancy to start the project, right?
Yeah.
I as I was mentioning earlier, I've been making patches, and I originally was gonna make like an order to get them, and then I realized it would be just better for me to buy the machine because it was almost as expensive. So
Yes.
I know I got a new sewing machine that embroiders, and I can make patches. Yeah. I got a little bit of a tangent there, I think so.
Yeah, no, I think there's like, you know, a lot of parallel that we can see here, you know, between kind of like the fandom of kind of like drag and drag performances or like certain queer activities and how they are, you know, very much like mirror similar like behaviors that sport fans have, you know, like to support their team, right? So when we talk about I think, you know, like, and what like really attractive, you know, about this series of cards here what is very like attractive to me is that they have like a critique on these kind of like hockey cards and how and how these players themselves are also playing characters when they're on the ice, when they're on the field. They kind of like represent kind of like these like these projections that the audience kind of like can see themselves in those players, right? So there's like this kind of like so basically I think like hockey players and drag queens, they all the same idols, right? So yeah, so I think that is a good segue to maybe like share the bit story about these masks and the doily mask, because they have a very interesting story, and I think like and not just how that you include them into the exhibition overall. It was so quite in a way queer, as opposed to kind of like like they are the only couple of items that are in kind of like that people don't immediately read as a sport items, right? They're not a jersey, they're not like a player card, right? So perhaps you could share some background story about these pieces.
Yeah, so for the exhibition, I was doing a lot of reading about hegemonic masculinity, and I wanted to look at instances within hockey specifically where we really saw this hyper masculinity, this like machoism that really was in the limelight in Canada, and the story of the hockey mask and how Jacques Plante faced a lot of criticism from hockey players, coaches, fans, and the rest of the public about choosing safety after he got a puck in the face, right? And for me, that's just a great example of this type of masculinity of this risk taking that isn't really needed for a sport. You can play it safely and still have fun and still be competitive in a sense, but it's just one of the examples of viewing safety as effeminate, possibly. I think of Don Cherry and the 90s and getting mad about people wanting fighting to stop in hockey. And that's still a conversation that's still happening in the league 20 years later. So I feel like this conversation about the hockey mask that happened is very similar to a lot of the issues that are still popping up in hockey. And so I really wanted to trace a root with that. Funny enough, these doilies were originally sugar starched, and they were starched in the face of the shape. So sorry, the shape of the face. So you could technically put them and lay them down without the plaster face. But after the first exhibition, we put them in a vitrine, and I think one of the masks was slightly damp. And so the whole bunch of them grew mold. And so I had to go and like do deep cleaning and bleaching. I thankfully got them back to like tip-top shape, but it was something that I had to sort of reconsider. And that's why I still have the faces there. I actually cast my face for this, and the cast, it was pristine in some parts, but the mask just didn't sit right. And so this is just like a bus that someone had given me for casting. So
that's right. They're very cool. Yeah, I believe that that it would have been so much powerful to have this dolly without the plaster face and just standing there. Yeah, basically I think knowing that original intention for them really make them much more compelling. So speaking of moistures and molds, I think it's a good segue to go to transition to Hazel Meyer.
Oh, can I just say something before you segue, if you don't mind?
For sure.
I just, because otherwise I'll forget, and I don't want to forget, and we could talk about this stuff later, but it's so nice to hear about your work from you, Lucas. And there's just all these really nice like overlaps between this kind of very physical work that you were doing and that you were having to deal with in making these works. And, you know, it's not a new thought, but it's one that I like returning to, this kind of relationship between craft and sport and stamina. And there just seems to be a lot of that. And especially hearing about how, you know, your body kind of broke down in certain places and you need help. You needed help. I was thinking about, you know, like football players getting ice baths after having like physio right away. And there's something really that's always really drawn me towards sport and kind of like handmade objects. And another thing I want to say, which this just came to me now, even though I have seen your hockey cards before, they very much remind me in the best way possible of Garbage Pail Kid cards.
Oh my God.
Like this might be not your generation. Do you know what Garbage Pail Kid cards are?
I think I've seen them before. Yeah.
They kind of like, they were cards, just like kind of baseball cards or like those Panini kind of collectibles. But they're so queer, right? They're just like messy and abject. And they just like were so delightful to me as a child because they were like everything you shouldn't be. And I see there are just some really nice sort of moments of relation between those and kind of the queerness they sort of like showed, you know, a small Hazel and looking at your cards also. Yeah. Anyways, all right, Tak, go ahead. Sorry, I just didn't want to lose any of those.
No, thanks for sharing. Yeah, Lucas, is there anything that you want to respond to Hazel comments?
Funny enough, as a kid, I used to collect a lot of those like little knick-knack stuff. I think of like the Spice Girl bubblegum that had the stickers. And I used to collect hockey cards. And what's funny is that I look back at the designs of like the cards my dad would collect, like the O-Peachy cards from like the 70s and 80s, that are like the designs are quite queer. And that was actually something that I pulled from for the designs of the card.
Nice.
And you know, seeing like the designs of these cards become like more sleek and you know, minimalistic. You know, it was something that I was also noticing with like the colors of the jerseys. But anyway, back to Hazel and
we could take all that up after.
Yeah, I think you know, I think I also echo kind of like the fact that that I think a lot of people can relate to just, you know, the process of card collecting, right? I think, you know, it's very like crucial to everyone, like formative year, especially, you know, the first few years of your pubescence, where you're like trying to understand yourself. Like for me, you know, it was like Pokemon and Digimon cards, right?
Yeah.
Because I wasn't that much into sport, still not quite, but you know, but like I was crazy about, you know, these kind of like weird looking creatures, right?
Yeah.
That you know, like sometimes are also super queer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but I think we can save that for a card collecting panel later after.
Yeah.
But yeah,
your panel.
yes. Yeah, but you know, Hazel is also another artist who kind of like marry textile and craft person shit into you know, with like topic and issues of sports. So I drew this one all the way back, you know, from 2011. I think this is one of like 1 year earlier work. You know, when we can see the kind of like the real emphasis in kind of like bringing these two apparently or like seemingly non-related subject matters into one space. And by coincidence, this is also presented in Sackville, where Lucas is in.
Yeah.
Right now. Yeah. So perhaps yeah, like Hazel, did you want to maybe introduce to the audience to what we're looking at?
Sure. Yeah, this is, gosh, I haven't thought about this work for a while, but it's nice to be reminded of it. So this was, gosh, I think it might have been the first iteration of a project of mine called Walls to the Ball, which of course was a riff on Balls to the Wall. And yeah, I was very much thinking about sport and craft and various, art forms that kind of use, textile-based art forms. And so Annie Albers was a weaver who was a part of the Black Mountain College sort of scene. And she wrote a very important book called On Weaving, which is very beautiful and kind of thinks about weaving beyond just like the warp and the weft, but kind of thinks about it theoretically almost. And Dirk Nowitzki, I can't even remember what team he played for. He was an NBA player. And in 2011, I was a huge fan of his, but my fandom hasn't got a good memory. So yeah, I guess with this in particular, I was like in Sackville for a month and I had the space to myself. So what you see on the wall is like a wall painting of macrame. And what you can't see is I made a basketball net out of that macrame stitch. And yeah, using that kind of trope of, what is it, like a priest and something or other walk into a bar, just that like very kind of easy sort of comedy trope. And I was like, oh, okay, let's sort of reimagine this and have a conversation between Annie Albers and Dirk Nowitzki. And kind of what I was talking about with regards to Lucas's work, just really finding like nice sort of overlap between kind of the making and the acquiring of skill within textiles and the acquiring of skill within sport, and in particular basketball. Yeah.
I think I think this is kind of like a good introduction to perhaps in the interest of time. Did you want to talk a little bit about this one? Because I think that I would prefer to spend more time to talk about muscle panic. That's where a lot of those elements came together. But I think before then, maybe like just a minute or two on the industrial anarchy.
Yeah, so I'll just go about this quickly. This was at AKA in Saskatoon, and part of this work developed very site specifically. So they've got these kind of rafters that make up the ceiling, which is a very familiar kind of ceiling treatment to stadiums, in which, if you're familiar with stadiums, often they've got like jerseys hanging from these rafters, championship jerseys, the jerseys of people who have retired and what have you. And yeah, so I was still very much thinking, I guess now I'm thinking more about intestines and my intestines in particular, and sport. I've got Crohn's disease. I've had it since I was 13. So it's kind of just always on my mind. It pops up now and then in some of my work. And this one, it really did. And yeah, I guess I was thinking about a few things about sort of the reluctance of people to talk about things intestinal and kind of various stigmas that surround certain diseases. But also if I'm thinking about queerness, like, rectums and assholes and, all sorts of things, anally focused. And I was like, oh, there's nothing like a stadium kind of environment to really like allow those conversations to be had. And so I made all these jerseys. On the front of them is a pink triangle, which is of course a very sort of familiar and iconic symbol of kind of the ACT UP sort of activism movement, in particular with regards to the AIDS crisis. And on the back of these jerseys, there is a number and then there's a word. And so usually those words are the names of the players. And so there are all sorts of different names and nouns and, verbs that are back there. So kind of much like Lucas was saying, like really using the material culture of sport and just like subverting it, because it's such a rich material culture. And, you know, there's so much language that is a part of these objects already, then to kind of like play with them a bit felt really exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, and the names that you put at the back of the jerseys, are they real names? Are they reference to actual people?
One of them I think is a reference. One of them says Gertrude, so that's in a reference to Gertrude Stein. One of them, I wish I could remember. A lot of them are like adjectives or, you know, oh, I wish I could remember. I'm not too sure. They kind of like, I just, you know, partly I was playing a lot of basketball at the time, so I kind of imagined my, you know, ragtag team of fellow basketball players at like the Dufferin Grove Park in Toronto, and just things that kind of represent them. Yeah. So yeah.
And now we got to kind of like your most I would say kind of like intensive and comprehensive work like to date is the series of installation, performance, I know, like strength formation intervention called Muscle Panic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how many times have you presented it?
It has been 11 times now, and 2 of those times haven't involved a performance, but all the other times there's been a performative element to it. And yeah, I thought we might talk about this. So one thing I always forget to mention, which actually feels really important, is that like the name Muscle Panic is very much a riff on the term moral panic. And I actually wrote down, because I always give such a weird kind of definition of it. And I was like, Hazel, write it down. So what a moral panic is, for folks who don't know, or if you've heard it, but maybe you don't know exactly what it is like, it's a fear of something dangerous and threatening to discourses of normality, right? So there's often like there's sex panics or gay panics. And I really wanted to play off that with muscle panic. And what the project tries to do is create the space, and the performance in particular, in which queer folks, generally women, non-binary folks, or trans folks. Lucas was a part of it once in Corner Brook, which was amazing. And to kind of create this space that's a little bit outside of time, and that does have an audience, but isn't necessarily for the audience. And it never has really engaged with competition. It's not about playing a game or playing a sport. It's about sort of all the things that like buffer competition in some ways. It's about the small sort of rituals that happen between players. It's about like intimacies that can happen when you are moving and sweating with another person. And it also, again, it like really plays off of and messes with all kinds of like material kind of culture that is important to sport. Yeah, I think. Yeah.
And I think that a very like interesting component in kind of like the whole installation of this project are these shirts here. And from understanding, you know, that they are actually shirts that worn by performers who either, you know, engage in an activity. I think in one of the iteration, you asked them to run for how many miles around the gallery canvas, you know, and then kind of like collected all of the sweaty shirts and put them in a pile here. And you know, just like from a very like, you know, museum standard curatorial practice perspective, that is a very kind of like interesting intervention, because you are basically, you know, introducing moistures, you know, kind of like extra moistures into the space. And for us professional, you know, or who have worked, you know, in a climate control room, such, you know, in an art gallery or an art museum, you know, that you have like, you know, this introduction is something that would raise a lot of alarm bells for our conservators and insurers, and you know, and other artists, you know, who who might not, who might be sharing, the space with this work. Yeah, so maybe, my question to you, Hazel, is like, have you ever encountered those barriers when you introduce, this component into a space?
No, not really. I think that's because there is a moment. So there are about 120 of those shirts. They're all red shirts that I thrifted. And then any kind of logo on the shirts I patched over with another shirt. So there's kind of like maybe, let's say, 6 sacrificial shirts that get, that cover up the kind of logos of the red shirts, and some say muscle, some say panic, and then there are a lot that are just blank. Before the performance happens, the performers choose 2 shirts, which I then launder. But then once they're done performing, those wet shirts do stay in the gallery, and they generally dry pretty quickly. And so I think just like the kind of speedy nature of like sweat drying, it's never been a really big deal as far as like institutions and kind of protocols and stuff. The most I've had to deal with is when I wanted to bring oranges into the AGO, because oranges usually hang on a bag in the performance. In the installation, and if a performance happens, they're eaten and the peels are left there. So there have been times when I've removed the peels after, but I think my intention with these shirts and kind of, they're all in my studio right now in a crate, but they probably have the sweat of like 60 people on them, and that feels really special. And I do a lot of work with like Queer Archives. My partner Kate McKinney and I do quite a bit of work together, and always we've taken a lot of like, how can I say this? I've always been really interested in like LGBTQ 2S1+, like archives when they've got t-shirts in particular, and when you get to see the yellow sort of like armpits, and just the way that sweat in particular embeds itself into textiles, and how that feels like a really important part of an archive, because while the person might no longer be with us, we have this like very real like memory of the kind of labor and the kind of sweat and the kind of, and the presence of a body. And I think with Queer Archives in particular, that just feels really huge and really important. And yeah, and so, I have kind of used that interest of mine to kind of guide the sort of red t-shirt part of Muscle Panic, which has also been shown on its own as a very large heap of t-shirts. Yeah,
thank you. And I think this I think it's like moving on to kind of like the next second one here. I think you mentioning the archives and the history of kind of like basically kind of like our community. So both of your project in Muscle Panic and in Lucas's exhibitions, there are mention of locker rooms, and here we have one of the iteration of Muscle Panic at the McLaren Arts Center, where there was a locker room component, in it. So I think my question to you both there, and this is like our first question on this panel, how like just given kind of like the some of the recent quote unquote like coming out of more and more professional athletes, and we know that like this like locker rooms, these locker rooms historically have been a very dangerous site for queer folks, especially queer sport professionals. What are your thoughts on this space now? Like if you were to have to share your like take up, what is this space? What had this space become, and where and where is it transforming to?
Do you want to go ahead, Lucas?
Yeah, I find the locker room has always been quite a queer space. You know, with my exhibition, I looked at the use of a specific color, which was believed to lower the heart rate and make people sort of calmer, and how that was used in this instance of trying to win above everything else. But then as a queer person, you know, locker rooms are where there's a potential of being beaten up. And it's also been transformed into, in some places, a cruising area. So it's quite a queer space when you think about it. And I think about how people who probably have some homophobic thoughts being scared of coming across a queer person in the locker room, and then the vice versa of that, of a queer person going to the locker room and being afraid of violence, right? And so it's this space that exists within most sports culture that is quite queer in a sense. It presents danger, and in some instances, people will play with it in order to win, and you know, in cheating, right? So it's something that for me, it wasn't a big focus with the exhibition at first, but it's slowly become something that I've been thinking about. What about you, Hazel?
Yeah, it's wild to look at this photo because I haven't since 2015, I haven't really restaged this kind of muscle panic locker room. And I think that's for quite a few reasons. Looking at this now, yeah, they're just such heavy spaces. Like my partner's like a non-binary human who, you know, faces a lot of people's shit when they go into a bathroom. And so, you know, locker rooms, I think they have the potential to be this utopic place where, you know, and it's kind of, you pointed to a few of these things, Lucas. And I think what I was trying to create with this version of Muscle Panic was you know, this kind of back room. You always hear these stories of the one girl hockey player on her team had to use the, you know, the janitor's closet as her locker room, as her change room. And so there's some, you know, overtones of that, just kind of reusing a place or making a place, repurposing a space. But yeah, I don't know. I think in my youth, it was just yeah, I've made this beautiful utopic space where queers can come together, and on the lockers, there are 3 signs, and I can't quite remember, but one says girl jock, one says les Hulk, and the other one says something similar to those things. But yeah, it's hard to sort of square my sort of dreams of this kind of utopian locker room space with real, you know, and just as you've both pointed to, real harm and real violence against trans people, and just all that can happen in locker rooms. So yeah, I like looking back to when I was this could be good. Life over and over is just no, people can be really awful and are not afraid to show violence and to do violence unto others that they don't understand, you know? Yeah,
Definitely.
right. Debbie Downer over here.
So perhaps, you know, this is a good time to check in with Emily to see if there's any question from the audience.
Hi.
Hi.
I don't yet have any submitted questions, but I will offer this up to everyone who's here with us. If you have any questions, please come forward and propose them.
Thank you. Yeah, so back to our discussions. So perhaps, you know, and I think, you know, this is kind of where where Lucas was kind of like hinting to in the answers about the locker room. I wanted to ask you, Ola, your thoughts on this kind of like idea of like hyper masculinity, or like the process of hyper masculinizations, as a reaction, or like a homophobic response to someone feeling threatened by the presence of queerness in the space, and how sport itself, alongside with other industry, entertainment industry, kind of like really kind of like lean into this like hyper masculinity as a way to maybe not like gatekeep, but more of like kind of like divide up and redistribute their influence and the power over kind of like the mass public.
Mhm. When I think of like sort of those instances, like I think of like growing up, I feel like homophobia, especially within sports, sort of starts with just like name calling. And at first it's like sort of innocent, people not knowing what those words mean because they hear it around them. And then it slowly builds this behavior as it develops as they get older. And thinking of myself like being like in the back car of my brother, like saying, "Oh, that's gay," and hearing that from someone else. And then, my mom being like, "Hey, do you know like what that means? And like you shouldn't be saying that to someone in terms of like an insult." I had no idea, but it's just through this like innocent name calling of really any word, and not really knowing the sense of it sometimes, like the word bugger. And then using that to attack someone, and it slowly, I think, ends up being in this bad vitriol. Now, sometimes it can come down to things outside of sports that develops that homophobia, and in some aspects that hypermasculinity. But I think we see that in in a lot of Canadian culture, because throughout the years, the big things that people were watching were hockey. And in the past also, and I say this as someone who has family members who are wrestlers, professional wrestling. And between the two of them, one of them has become more accepting of queerness, which is professional wrestling, where we have queer performers who are not performing as stereotypes, but as performing as actual people, doing these wrestling things. Whereas in the league, it's, we had someone who was drafted that came out, but I'm sure there's other gay hockey players, they're just too scared to come out, and it's because of this hyper-masculine culture. There tends to be a bit of violence to it, and we see substance abuse sometimes, and a shame in actually like coming forward and trying to find help. And also, other instances of violence from it. And I feel like a lot of that is just ingrained sometimes from the parents who are in the theater, not theater, but in the rink. For example, in Newfoundland, there's this proposal for young referees to wear green and white stripes because they were facing so much hatred from the parents in the rink, right? So it's something that it's just a cyclical culture in hockey that really needs to be addressed, which I think is starting to now with so many news stories popping up, but there's still so much resistance, right? And so I think there's going to be a point where things are going to go too far, I think, and people are going to change their mind. But people are really standing their ground. I think some people And I think because of that, it's because there were people who were fans of these professional sports, and they slowly have stopped watching. They're still fans of the sports themselves, but what's being put out into the masses is not a healthy culture, right? And it doesn't represent them.
No. Yeah, Hazel, any thought on hypermasculinity? Maybe
No, sorry.
invest,
But the thing, I think my engagement with sport is like much in the same way. I just absolutely push competition aside. I don't really engage that much in thinking through sort of some of the things that Lucas does. But on that note, something that I'm thinking of that reminds me of what you were just speaking of, Lucas, is how change is made. And I'm just even thinking about like soccer as it's being played here in Canada, and how what's been happening with like the women's soccer team, Christine Sinclair and all her teammates, and how they've really had to take a stand with regards to how much they're being paid, even though they're Olympians, which whatever, the Olympics is its own problematic situation, but and just how I feel that sport, maybe because it's like, I know we've played it in Canada for a long time, but like it is sort of gaining a bit more momentum, and it does seem to be a bit more like less deeply steeped in like a, I don't know, like a deep commitment to like what gender plays that sport. That I don't know. I'm not really saying anything definite. I'm just saying like it's been really nice to hear about what's happening, but also really devastating because these women on the Canadian team are totally coming up against a ton of sexism, that I'm not surprised about, but I'm just like, okay, maybe this is good. Maybe, and I think just with regards to like accessibility, to have a ball, it's like a bit of a different, it's a different kind of engagement.
yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I do love watching hockey. I like watching women's hockey, but it's, I don't know, it's just it's almost like maybe the dominant sport narrative of Canada can change a little bit and kind of update itself.
Yeah, I think I totally agree that I think the implications and the impact that have like that this hyper masculinity that sport history has associated itself with, that does have kind of like negative impact on not only kind of like queer players, but also kind of like female player, and I think the other aspect and area in our society, right? So in a way it is kind of like systematic, and and I think there are like a lot of like I think it was last year, or it was a year ago, but there was kind of like a new revelation about a series of like abuses that happened within the organizations, on like these like professional sport organizations that that one could say that are have like direct outcome of however long corruption and a toxic management, or a toxic culture. So I think by I think by challenging that, I think that it should make it more accessible and more inclusive for everyone to play, to come and play, right? I think like at the end of the day, we want it to be in an environment that that is kind of like promoting not only physical health, but also mental health and social health as well, right? Because a lot of people kind of like learn how to work with other people kind of like through these kind of like sport events, or like the sport activities, because in a way it is kind of like a 90-minute simulation of how the world works, right? How we work together to go towards a common goal. So it doesn't make any sense, and it's not a realistic reflection of the world if you only have the best, the fittest players on your team all the time.
Well, like I
Yeah.
think some sports have now been, for decades been built on this sense of having to have violence within them to gain fans and more money, right? With hockey, I think about the goalie mask, but fighting in hockey and how, I think of like my dad's YouTube, just like hockey fights, right? That's like all the search results. But
Yeah.
it's something that it was so pushed within the league where you had, players who were specifically enforcers, or they were basically there to fight. And that built a league that excluded a lot of people. It was, for professional hockey, it's a men's league, so they push out women. And the constant excuse is, oh, well, they're not built to fight, which, I'm sure there are female hockey players and non-binary hockey players who are way faster than some of the players on the ice there and are able to outmaneuver them.
Mhm.
So, it's basically been the barrier to exclude a lot of people from the spotlight, which is like professional, NHL, NFL. And I think there are some movements within sports to create mixed leagues. We've seen that with like curling, for example. And you can get into fights in curling. Like I was a curler and I've gotten into fights in curling, not fist fights,
Really?
but arguments.
Okay.
But like, it's something you're throwing a stone, you're balancing and throwing a stone and sweeping it. It's and there are different ways of altering that game so that anyone else can play. They can sit down and push the stone, for example, or they can be the skip where they're deciding where the stone goes. So there are sports that have been adapting to create a more accessible sport, but there are some that are the ones that are making the big bucks that
Mhm.
rely on the eye candy of fighting to try to keep their roots into like this like money hog almost, like
Definitely, yeah.
they don't want fighting to go away because they're getting they're getting the views, right?
Yes. Yeah. I think, I still want to comment on that, but I feel like it's gonna open, an entire, like kind of worms once we talk about, the produce violence, the entertainment industry complex, and all that. But I think we do have a question here from an audience.
From Nico McGriffin, they say, "Hi Hazel, I just wanted to ask when and how Muscle Panic started for you. Was there a catalyst?"
Hi, Nico. Thanks for the question. Yeah, it was very situational in that I was invited to do a project in Warkworth, Ontario, and I went to do a site visit, and there was a huge, beautiful abandoned barn that had been used as a skating rink over the years. And then presently it was used once a year as like the 4-H cattle competition grounds. And it was just very beautiful. And I was, I asked to use it, and I was playing basketball with my partner, Kate, at the time, and a few of our other friends. And I just imagined this space, the Cow Palace, being a place where queers would go at night to play sports, but playing sports also means getting sweaty and like pressing up against another body, but like in a kind of sanctioned way, to do sort of illicit things under the guise of sport. And that's really how it started. And it's kind of like gone very many places since there, but that is what started the project. It was very much based on this space and and like my response to it, and also just what I was doing in my spare time at the time. Yeah, and my partner Kate, I remember they went to a conference in like Ohio, and they were on some panel with someone, and Kate brought up or like used the term muscle panic. And then I remember they told me they like flex their arm, and it was really nice. Like that's how muscle panic became muscle panic, just like a bunch of beautiful little things coming together. And yeah, which is like how so many nice things happen. It sounds like that's how, Lucas, your project happened, like things that are happening in your life, situations like the pandemic, an environment, a little bit of this, a word. Yeah.
Everything goes to the Rolodex. And then one day you're browsing through it and you're like, oh, I forgot about all of these.
Yeah.
You have a project. I think that's how it works for a lot of people, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's quite nice.
I love hearing that project started in Warkworth. My nana and grandpa lived there when I was a kid. And
Really?
yeah, I haven't thought about Warkworth in so long.
That's amazing. Wow. That's wild. I probably walked past your nana and grandpa's house.
Probably. I mean, there's like
Very
12
small.
houses, so.
Yeah. Oh, that's so wild.
I love listening to the two of you talking about your work and thinking about how I've felt in exhibition spaces with both of your work, and that kind of incredible feeling of comfort and belonging and like a warm hug that the two of you create, like these really intentional color palettes. Like Lucas, you talking about Drunk Tank Pink, that has never ceased to make people giggle when I tour them through. And Hazel, you as well, like these really intentional color palettes where you're creating joy and allowing folks, I think, to really open themselves up to be vulnerable and have these difficult conversations and think about the kinds of things that they've experienced or been complicit in, and maybe being open to wanting to change.
That's really nice. Thank you.
I want to thank my years of watching HGTV when I was a sick kid. For my sense in color palettes.
I love that. I have some comments from Nora Ashmore. They say, I know why I love watching basketball and hated hockey, ... fighting. And they also say loved Lucas's works.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't watch, I mean, I'll watch curling and I watch tennis. But I don't watch much hockey anymore. And I think, I mean, I fell out of it a couple of years ago and you probably know why. But, you know, it's definitely something that I look back and I think, oh yeah, like as a kid, I've really enjoyed the fights. I really enjoyed Coach's Corner, and it's all like eye candy. And to put that aside, I'm like, what is a sport that I really get focused in? And it was like these little minute details, which are within curling and then in tennis as well. And I think that's what I've really enjoyed in sports recently. Also snowboarding. I love snowboarding and watching people snowboard on TV.
I know that dog agility competitions are not in the same thing, but I just love that when you watch them, they're so wholesome. And you know, the humans are just like, you did great, bud, even when they went wholly the wrong way and knocked over all of the posts. And I just wish that we could bring that energy to sport, human sport, and you know, have that kind of joy with each other, like, hey, you tried, way to come out.
You know what, there are these like really great instances, like you see, like if you watch TSN or Sports Center, all those, they'll have like the blooper reels, and you know, sometimes people are embarrassed, but it's all a good laugh. And like that's one of the more enjoyable parts of like those highlight shows. And so, you know, why not have more of that, right? It's fun to, you know what, screw professionals, let's have people who are doing the sport for the first time on the field, right? And that's what we film.
Love that. Just film the amateurs.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all so much for coming online with us today. This has been incredible. You fulfilled my dreams of a public program. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you to everyone who joined.
Thank you,
us.
Emily.
thank you, everyone. This was really lovely.
I hope
Thank
you
you,
get
Hazel. Thank Lucas.
Thank you.
Thank you.
go outside and enjoy the springtime. Except
Yeah, right?
cold
It's
and
snowing.
attack.
Snowing, it's like literally a storm and
Oh, geez.
nighttime.
Okay, Hazel, you go enjoy the sun. The
Yeah,
rest
I'll
of you
go. I'll go smell a crocus. Gotta go.
enjoy.
Okay,
Bye all.
take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.